Hello, you're watching the Daily Report for this Thursday, November 4th here in Korea. Breakthrough infections are becoming more common amid greater public vaccination coverage. Now, we delve into this reality later on the program. Here first is the broader pandemic coverage. I have Kwon Soa standing by. Soa, welcome.
Hi, Sunny.
Right, so what is the latest here on the local front?
Well, infections this Thursday have declined from Wednesday. So let's start off with the figure today here. 2,482 infections were posted as of 12 a.m. and that includes 2,457 domestic transmissions and 25 cases from abroad. Now, it is a drop from the day before, but still, for the second straight day, we are posting way above 2,000 infections. And also, compared to last Thursday, it is an on-week increase. By region, there has been a drop in the capital region in all three places here, Seoul, Gyeonggi Province and Int'l, and also quite a plunge in Gyeongsang-Namdo Province, which had a triple-digit figure just a day ago. Now, the number of people in critical or severe condition has dropped by 13 cases, standing at 365, but the number of daily deaths this Thursday stood at 24. And this is the highest number in around 10 months. Meanwhile, the total number of cases stands at 373,120. Let's move over to our vaccination figures now. 80.5% of the nation's population has received at least one shot, and 75.9% are fully vaccinated. Taking a look at the global figures, there's been an increase in daily infections as of Thursday noon here in Korea. More than 534,000 cases and around 8,500 COVID-19 related deaths. Now let's move over to the 20 countries with the highest number of accumulated cases. If you have watched our program yesterday, I did mention that from the countries here, from the US to Iran, there were some countries that saw infections in the thousands, but now these 8 countries here all have a 5-digit figure increase in daily infections, and also more than 20,000 in Germany and Ukraine, and those are some countries we will take a closer look in a bit. But first, back to you, Sunny.
All right, so thank you for now. Right, precisely 2 weeks from this Thursday, college-bound students here will take their entrance exams. Now, in light of this upcoming event, education authorities have announced measures to ensure a safe testing environment. Our Jong-un has details on that. Wonjong, welcome.
Good to be back.
Right then, let's start with the new framework of guidelines within the academic arena.
Yes, like you said, the college entrance exam are just around the corner, coming up in just 2 weeks, November 18th, I believe. But to prevent the cluster infections at the testing sites, a special prevention period will be in fact starting today on November 4th to November 17th. The first thing I would like to point out are the health inspections that will be conducted on site until November 12th. Ahead of the exam date, the inspection teams will review the safety measures in place at 320 cram schools where many students study together in groups. Now, the PC rooms and singing rooms and study cafes are also on the list.
I see. Wonjong, tell us a bit about the efforts at the testing sites on the actual day of the exam, which is, like you said, November 18th.
Right. South Korean government has already experienced last year, actually, the height of the pandemic. The similar prevention measures will be in place this year, but in slightly modified form. There will be 3 different types of testing centers for healthy students, students who have come into contact with the COVID patient, and students with COVID. For COVID-19 patients, students will take the exams at designated hospitals, treatment centers, and separate testing sites. As of October 27th, there are 1,251 sites for students without COVID, 112 for students who have been isolated, and 30 for those with COVID. And for those who are being treated at home, they will be assigned to either a hospital or treatment center. And just like last year, only 24 students will be allowed at each testing center to maintain social distance. And of course, all students must wear their masks while taking the exam. However, unlike last year, partitions will not be installed at each desk, but only at cafeterias during lunchtime. And the COVID-19 testing centers will open until 10 p.m. on the day before the exam date.
I see. Meanwhile, on the booster front, Wonjo, how is the booster campaign coming along outside of Korea?
So let's begin with Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong will start rolling out COVID vaccine boosters doses next week. And people can choose to get jabbed with their either Pfizer or China Sinovac vaccine. The elderly will be the first in line for additional shots, and health workers, cross-border truck drivers, and others who are highly exposed to getting the virus will be next. Around 1.86 million people are eligible. They can start booking their shots from the November 5th, with actual vaccinations will kick off on November 11th. Meanwhile, over in Europe, Italian health authorities have authorized booster shots from Pfizer or Moderna to those who got the Janssen vaccine. And about 1.6 million people will be eligible to receive the shots. The country already started vaccinating high-risk groups and the elderly age over 60 and above, and with the third vaccine doses in September.
I see an early start there. Wonjo, over in the U.S., I hear the green light has been granted for children vaccinations. Tell us more.
That is absolutely true. Absolutely right. Starting November 3rd, the U.S. kick off its vaccination campaign for kids aged 5 to 11. This comes as the U.S. CDC backed FDA's decision to approve COVID-19 vaccines for children. With this latest development, around 94% of the total population in the U.S. are now eligible to get the vaccine. Also, Saudi Arabia also gave the okay to inoculate children aged 5 to 11. The children will also receive Pfizer's COVID vaccine.
Right. And what can you tell us about the dosage for children vaccinations?
So children actually get a third of the adults, the
dosage.
Exactly. So there will, for adults will be 30 microgram, and for kids will be 10 microgram, and with the 3 week apart. So it will be 10, and 3 weeks after they will get another 10. For adults will be 30, another after weeks, and they will get 30. So
right, yeah. I see a third.
Slightly less, yeah.
Right, that is good to know. Now let's get SOA involved in this topic. Now, given the latest green light for children vaccination by the U.S., I'm assuming this decision will probably affect the decisions to be made by other countries, so?
That is highly likely, Sunny, because many countries that are already using the Pfizer vaccine have been really watching the U.S.'s decision regarding this vaccination for these children. And in fact, now European regulators are also considering the move, and Brazil is expected to give the green light for that same age group, 5 to 11, soon as well. Now, meanwhile, there are also other countries that are vaccinating even younger kids. We have been talking about China before, that has started its vaccination for children aged 3 and above. And also India is recommending its homegrown Covaxin vaccine. I'll get into that specific vaccine later as well. But they are recommending this for even children aged 2 and above. Now, Korea may consider lowering its age for vaccination here in the country in the future as well, because we have been seeing rises in infections among children and teenagers. And I just want to mention one recent cluster infection in Jeollabuk-do province in the southern part of the country, in the city of Jeonju. There was a cluster infection at an elementary school that led to 41 infections in total, and that has not only affected that school but also kids at other schools, as well as cram schools, family members. So that has spread to the society. So that has also led to almost 400 people currently in quarantine.
I see. And staying with that, Wonjo, what is the stance here in the country, the official stance from authorities with regard to vaccination for children? Because at the moment we're offering the vaccinations to those aged 12 and above. That
is absolutely right. Right now, teenagers aged 12 to 15 are, like you said, eligible to book their COVID-19 shot. And so far, as of November 3rd, the booking rate is much lower than actually the other age group, at a slightly over 28%. But for 16 and 17 years old, the rate is much higher at 65%. But again, lower than those over 18 years old. However, the health authorities on Wednesday, they said they continue to urge them to get vaccinated because the benefits of getting vaccinated is still outweigh the risks of getting infected. And there are also 201 new cases among the teenagers in October 25th, but after only 5 days, the figures has doubled to 465 cases. So these numbers are very, very concerning right now.
Right, which is why vaccination for children, even here in the country above 12, should take place, should get more momentum then.
That is it.
All right, Won Jung, as always, thank you very much for that. I'll see you on Friday.
Thank you.
Right, and for greater world coverage with regard to the COVID-19 situation, I have Soa again. Now, Soa, you are going to tell us more about the situation over in Germany and in the Ukraine, as you mentioned earlier.
Right, but we will first begin with some more news regarding vaccination, as this time it's about a new vaccine that has been given the green light by the World Health Organization. India's first homegrown COVID-19 vaccine by local drug maker Bharat Biotech has been approved for emergency use on Wednesday, making it the 7th that has been approved by this organization, following AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Sinopharm, Moderna, Janssen, and Sinovac approvals. The Indian vaccine, called Covaxin, has shown an efficacy rate of 78% against the virus after 2 doses and has been already authorized for emergency use in India in January. According to the WHO's Strategic Advisory Group of experts on immunization, the vaccine's benefits significantly outweigh risks and meet the organization's standard for protection against COVID-19. It is recommended to be used in an interval of 4 weeks for people aged 18 and above. It's another milestone for India, which once led the world in daily COVID-19 infections.
It is a momentous occasion for Indian innovation, Indian entrepreneurship, Indian startup, and Indian science. As a scientist, I pray that India's innovation is starting and it's going to boom as we go along.
And this latest decision may also pave the way for India to become part of the COVAX facility, which is, of course, co-led by the WHO.
Right, and speaking about the global health body, so I understand it has just released its weekly information, that is, on the global COVID-19 trend. What is that about?
Right, Sunny. So in the past week, there has been another increase in COVID-19 cases internationally. And in the past week, ending on October 31st, there has been an increase by 3%. And when it comes to Europe, 6% of an increase was posted by the WHO, and that is an increase for the 5th consecutive week. And one of the nations that is recently dealing with resurgences is Germany. Now, the pandemic is by no means over, is what authorities in Germany are saying, as a 4th wave is developing in the country, with more than 20,000 new cases reported on Wednesday local time. Some 2,200 patients were reportedly in intensive care on Wednesday, the highest figure since June. Over the past week, 666 fatalities were reported. The state of Bavaria, meanwhile, has decided to re-implement anti-virus measures, such as mandatory wearing of face masks at schools after children or students return from autumn holidays. And even this is considered.
If the situation becomes very serious, such as in some hotspots already described by county commissioners, workplaces will be looked at closely. This means the 3G rule will come into effect at locations with 10 employees or more. Also, we will considerably extend the 2G rule for areas such as public events, cultural presentations, or sports.
Now, to clarify, 3G refers to vaccinated, recovered, or tested, and 2G, vaccinated or recovered.
I see. And so, like I said, you've been mentioning Ukraine quite a bit. I understand anti-vaccination rallies there, adding on to authorities' concerns amid the resurgence.
Right, Sunny. So many authorities in Europe are calling the current situation the pandemic of the unvaccinated. And anti-vaccination sentiment remains an issue, and fury among some groups is growing with the increase in mandatory vaccinations and strong restrictions for unvaccinated. So when it comes to Ukraine, some state workers are required to get vaccinated, and in so-called red zone areas, only vaccinated or people who have negative test results can enter restaurants, indoor gyms, or even use public transportation. Schools in virus hotspots have been closed late last month. Not all schools, but some of them, and that was also part of what hundreds of Ukrainians were demonstrating against on Wednesday. So let's take a listen to a protester as well as the Ukrainian health minister against these demonstrations.
Schools are closed for an unclear reason. It is injustice. We are suspended from work because we don't want to be subject to medical experiments. Hands off our children.
I would like to talk separately about rallies of people that we see today with calls not to get vaccinated. In my opinion, they make a mockery of our doctors and families who, unfortunately, have lost their relatives due to COVID-19. Trust me, this anti-vaccination spirit quickly disappears in intensive care units, and fake certificates don't work there.
Right, well, that appears to be a continuing dilemma over in Europe. Right, so thank you very much for the coverage. I'll see you again on Friday.
My pleasure.
U.S. central bank officials have announced their intentions to withdraw their emergency support of the economy that was put in place early last year to address COVID-19 repercussions. Our Kim Yeon-sung has the top story.
The U.S. Federal Reserve will start dialing back its enormous COVID-19 stimulus program. It will likely start from mid-November, marking the Fed's first major pullback since the program was launched in March 2020. After the pandemic chilled the U.S. economy and slammed the employment market, the Fed froze interest rates at near zero and began buying $120 billion of Treasury and mortgage-backed securities each month. For a year and a half, this aggressive tactic helped pin down long-term rates and made borrowing easier, giving the pandemic-ridden U.S. economy the leg up it needed. The Fed announced on Wednesday it will start cutting $15 billion a month from the bond buying program and potentially wrap up the program entirely by June 2022. But for now, interest rates will remain the same.
Our decision today to begin tapering our asset purchases does not imply any direct signal regarding our interest rate policy.
The Fed said the time is right for tapering, thanks to the substantial progress the U.S. economy has made toward reaching maximum employment, as well as inflation that averages around 2%. It is also forecasting that the U.S. economy will pick up steam as COVID-19 vaccinations continue across the country. But an expert says that despite this forecast, the Fed is in no rush to raise interest rates.
They're probably going to wait until they see more job creation taking place, or if the inflation gets substantially worse than it is currently. But right now, it seems to be settling down a little bit, even though it's still at a high level. Interest rate, if it is going to rise, it's probably going to be at the second half of next year.
The Fed's tapering decision will cause ripples across the global economy. One expert projects a global economic slowdown.
Global effect of the tapering will be credit market becoming more difficult. That means it is really difficult to borrow from the banking system. And another aspect is the market interest rate will go up.
He added that firms with low capital will perhaps be the hardest hit. As for South Korea, however, a senior government official said Thursday that the Fed's tapering will have a limited impact on the domestic economy, and the government will be ready to stabilize the market when needed. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
In other news, an annual report by the U.S. Department of Defense claims China's security strategy for the Korean Peninsula includes keeping American troops away from its border. The report goes on to add that Beijing's focus on maintaining stability on the Korean Peninsula involves preventing North Korea's regime collapse and a military confrontation on the Korean Peninsula. Beijing reportedly holds regular military drills to create what it calls a North Korean buffer in the event of a hostile encounter. And the Blue House has turned the spotlight to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's mentioning of an end-of-war declaration. Speaking to the presidential press corps in Budapest on Wednesday, the senior Blue House official refrained from sharing when Kim had made the reference, but it is widely believed that the official was referring to a speech Kim gave at the Supreme People's Assembly back in September. There, Kim said hostile acts would persist despite declaring an end to the war if factors that led to distrust and conflict remain remain. Meanwhile, the Blue House comment came in response to questions about whether there had been any interaction between Seoul and Pyongyang regarding a possible visit by the Pope to North Korea. President Moon Jae-in and his Hungarian counterpart have agreed to strengthen ties on both the economic and environmental fronts. Our Blue House correspondent Kim Min-ji reports.
South Korea and Hungary have agreed to elevate their relations to a strategic partnership and step up cooperation in promising industries. President Moon Jae-in, on a state visit to Budapest, held a summit on Wednesday with Hungarian President Arirang.
양국의 경제 협력을 더욱 강화하기로 했습니다. 우리 두 정상은 지난해 코로나에도 불구하고 양국이 사상 최대의 교역액을 기록한 것을 높이 평가했습니다. 전기차 배터리 등 미래의 유망 산업에서 양국의 교역이 확대되도록 함께 노력할 것입니다.
Bilateral trade between the two countries reached an all-time high of $3.6 billion in 2020. South Korea is also the #1 foreign investor in Hungary, which hosts the production factories of big South Korean companies, including Samsung SDI and SK Innovation. During the summit, the leaders also agreed to work toward the common goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050.
South Korea and Hungary have both pledged to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. It's the joint opinion of both countries that carbon neutrality is impossible without nuclear energy.
To this, Seoul's top office later explained that President Moon said that while nuclear energy will be used until carbon neutrality is reached, the country will not be building new plants and will shut ones deemed too old. The Moon administration has long insisted that it would gradually phase out nuclear energy.
President Arirang explained Hungary's policy of nuclear energy and renewable energy. In response, President Moon said that while the role of nuclear power continues until carbon neutrality is reached in 2050, he will not construct new plants, close down old ones, and expand the mix of renewable and hydrogen energy to achieve carbon neutrality.
President Moon's visit to Hungary is the first by a South Korean leader in 20 years. The two countries established diplomatic ties in 1989. Building on the summit with Hungary, President Moon will now seek to bolster ties with the Visegrad Group, which also includes the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland, in the areas of science technology, defense, and nuclear. The V4 is one of South Korea's main export partners within the European Union and home to some 650 Korean companies. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News, Budapest.
Meanwhile, in Glasgow, Seoul's Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi met with his global counterparts at the UN climate talks to explore ways to better finance green activities in developing countries. Our Min Soo-kyun tells us more.
Another day at the COP26 UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, Scotland. Finance ministers, global business leaders and investors from across the world gathered on Wednesday to discuss ways to mobilize climate funding. Dubbed COP26 Finance Day, the agenda at the summit was channeling funds to developing countries to fight climate change. South Korean Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi attended the event along with other finance chiefs of major economies. Hong called on countries for their full support and participation in response to climate change. He added it was important to provide a funding stream to help developing countries tackle the issue. At the meeting, the finance minister also stressed the importance of cooperation on multiple fronts. This includes cooperation between the public and private sectors, as well as on a state level. He also noted that climate change requires policy coordination tailored to each country. On the same day, the minister met with the executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and there he agreed to provide a total of $2.5 million over the next 3 years. The fund will be used to support climate response projects for developing countries. Hong also had a bilateral meeting with Denmark's Finance Minister Nikolai Wammen, where the two discussed efforts to combat climate change and ways to cooperate in the future. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
On a light note, two Korean seeded Paduk players faced each other off virtually for a title that meant much more than a personal victory. Our Han Sung-woo explains.
It was an all-Korean affair. An intense 3-hour-long duel on home turf for one of World Paduk's most coveted titles.
For the first time in 14 years, this year's Samsung Fire and Marine Insurance World Masters Final was played between two South Koreans, world number 1 Shin Jin-seo and number 2 Park Jong-hwan. The crown eventually went to Park, who surprisingly came back after losing on Monday to defeat Shin 2 days straight in a contactless best-of-3 format, putting a halt to Shin's domestic dominance and reigniting a rivalry that had recently lost meaning.
Losing all 7 duels to Jin-seo in last year's Namhae Supermatch series was most painful. I knew from the start it'd be tough this time as well, but I guess luck was on my side. I'm so happy I won, and I think we've both grown a lot from facing each other so often.
Beside $250,000 in prize money, his victory also brings home a trophy that had gone to China for the past 6 years, as Korean Paduk fought through a prolonged slump.
Korean Paduk players are now playing with more confidence against Chinese pros, and it's showing. We claimed both the championship and second place at this tournament, and I'm hoping Team Korea can continue its winning ways.
Those winning ways will continue after the champ takes a short break, though, away from the pressure, closer to family and friends.
I'd just like to treat my peers to some delicious food. Perhaps some Korean barbecue. Yeah, definitely some good barbecue.
한성우, Arirang News.
Seoul Olympic Park has a special guest on display amid rave reviews over Squid Game. The larger-than-life doll in the red light, green light episode, whose name is Jong-un, by the way, is there at the park, much to the delight of her fans. I have Chun Sung-cho standing by. Sung-cho, welcome.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
Right, so do start by telling us more about Jong-un.
Yes, so once again, I'm dressed in this famous Squid Game tracksuit because let's face it, the world still hasn't gotten over the Squid Game fever, and we fans are trying to look for ways to experience at least a bit of what it feels like being on this mega hit show. So that is exactly why I've brought you guys here today, the Olympic Park in southeastern Seoul. And here is a replica of a giant doll featured on the show. So her name is Jong-un. She is 4 meters tall, and she arrived here late last month to celebrate the show's global success. And as you can see, she is quite tall, but she's not exactly 7 meters tall like the actual doll. Also, she can't roll her eyes or turn its head and start shooting people like the actual doll on the show, but still, it gives me the chills just looking at the life-size doll right before my eyes. I think there's just something about her eyes that gives me the chills. And as you can see, here are throngs of people here who have all come to get a glimpse of what the doll actually looks like. There are actually a lot of people behind the camera right now. And oh my God, look at the doll, right? So he is dressed like in the uniform just like me. So I'm going to talk to the owner here. 안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
네, 지금 걔도 이렇게 잘 옷을 입고 있는데 여기 어떻게 오셨어요?
강아지한테랑 같이 찍어가지고 사진 남기고 싶어서 왔어요.
So she said that she came here to get a photo with the doll. 그 오징어 게임 보셨을 텐데 실제로 보니까 기분이 어떠세요?
무서우신데. 그리고 뭔가 이렇게 사진 찍을 수 있게 해서 좋은 것 같아요.
감사합니다. 답변 감사합니다. So I asked her what she feels after looking at the doll in real life, and she said it's actually creepy, and she's thankful for the opportunity to be able to take a picture with the doll in real life. All right, so to give you a more explanation about the doll, so in episode 1 of the show, the players participate in a version of the game, red light, green light. Actually, there are, I believe there are different variations of the game across all different countries, but the Korean version is called 무궁화 꽃이 피었습니다. I think you can hear it in the background music as well. 피었습니다, right? So its translation goes, 무궁화 flower has blossomed. And of course, 무궁화 is the Korean national flower. It's the rose of Sharon. And I know the phrase has nothing to do with what the actual game is all about, but it's nonetheless one of the major Korean children's games. I grew up playing it in the playground with my friends, and the Korean version also follows the same simple principles. So while the person's eyes are on you, try to stay still, but also try to make it to the finish line as quickly as possible. And also, the doll, Young-hee, she's actually a real character from Korean textbooks. I grew up hearing stories about Young-hee. I think every South Korean who've gone to South Korean elementary school will know who Young-hee is. So I think that is what makes the show so creepy and surprising as well, the juxtaposition of innocent child's play with violent deaths. So the doll will be displayed at the park until January 23rd. So if you get a chance, if you're around, maybe you can come here and get a selfie with the doll as well before she goes away. But of course, you have to remember that you have to keep your masks on at all times. Try to keep a safe distance from other people since it is a public space. This has been Jeon Sung-cho reporting live from the Olympic Park, and back to Sunny in the studio.
Right, Sung-cho, you're right. A nostalgic reminder of our textbook illustrations back in the 70s and 80s. All right, thank you for that report. See you next week. A rather worrying trend is taking shape on the local front as we make our way into a new normal amid the pandemic. Roughly half of all new infections in recent days are breakthrough cases here in the capital, Seoul. For more on this grim reality, I have Professor Chung Gi-seok from Hallym University. It is a pleasure to have you back, Professor Chung.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
I also have Dr. Alice Hyung-Young-Dan from Miss Medi Women's Hospital. It is a pleasure again, Dr. Dan.
Good afternoon.
Right, Professor Chung, we'll start with you then. How does the rate of breakthrough infections involving COVID-19 vaccines compare to the rate of such cases for other vaccines, including the seasonal flu?
Well, first of all, we should not be very afraid of breakthrough infection because second, fully vaccinated rate is around 76%, and consider if all of us are vaccinated 100%, then every new cases will be a breakthrough infection. And first of all, the vaccine efficacy, in other words, the effectiveness is 70 to 90% according to a different vaccine. That means, in other words, about 10% or 30% of vaccinated people are prone to be infected. And if you, for instance, the flu vaccine, we do not measure a vaccine effectiveness in Korea, but according to a US CDC, they report every year about the vaccine effectiveness. And it ranges, surprisingly, from 10% to only 60%. So whether you got a flu vaccine or a COVID-19 vaccine, breakthrough infection happens. Don't be afraid of it. But the vaccine, even though cannot prevent infection, but it can prevent the mortality and the severity. So you should get the vaccine despite any kind of breakthrough infection occurs.
Right, and staying with that, Dr. Dan, do compare for us the risks to health upon infection between vaccinated and unvaccinated people.
Right, I would say the bottom line is very clearly vaccination works and it's helpful and we should all get vaccinated. The reason why is because the risk of getting infected is 5 to 6 times higher in the unvaccinated compared to the vaccinated. And the risk of hospitalization and death is 11 to 12 times higher in the unvaccinated compared to the vaccinated. So this just echoes what Dr. Jung was saying. Vaccination, it works. No vaccine is 100%, but in terms of protection, the levels are still quite high.
Right, and talking about protection, with regard to breakthrough infections, Dr. Tan, what does science tell us about the protection offered by vaccine-induced immunity as opposed to infection-induced immunity?
So that's very interesting. So natural immunity, of course, does confer some degree of protection, but the epidemiologic and the immunologic evidence suggest that if you get vaccinated, fully vaccinated after natural infection, your immune levels are actually boosted to quite a much higher degree. It enhances your protection and it reduces your risk of reinfection. In terms of the data, there's a study out of Kentucky that studied a group of people who had all had infection with COVID-19. And then they compared the group of people who had infection, a history of infection, no vaccination afterwards, and people who did get fully vaccinated after natural infection. And what they found is people who did not get vaccinated after natural infection had a 5.5 times higher risk of reinfection compared to people who did get fully vaccinated. And in another study out of the United States, similarly, the odds of getting infected were much higher in people who just had natural immunity versus people who had full immunity after full vaccination. So the evidence is quite clear that immunity after full vaccination is higher than immunity after natural infection. But if you get vaccinated after natural infection, that actually causes a very high degree of protection.
Right, I see. Professor Jong, contrary to initial claims, I understand a breakthrough infection patient is just as likely as an unvaccinated person to spread the virus to those around him or her. Could you tell us more about this?
Well, unfortunately, it is true. Because the Delta virus is a very highly contagious variant, most highest one ever. And there is a study which have looked at the transmission rate among the households. If one is infected in a patient, she or he can transmit the disease to other family member. If one is vaccinated, it's 25%. Unvaccinated, 38%. A bit higher in unvaccinated, but not a big difference. If you know that the antibody does not prevent the viruses from proliferating on throat and nose, you can understand that. Because you have antibody in your body, within the body, not on surface of nose and throat. So you cannot prevent the viruses proliferate on your nose and throat, and then you can transmit the virus by coughing up or breathing. So it is conceivable that even though you are fully vaccinated, you can transmit the virus, even though you are not suffering from that disease. So even though you are vaccinated, then you have to wear masks and keep your personal hygiene in order not to transmit the virus when you are keeping to the other people.
Right, to ensure the health of those around you. Dr. Tan, our new strategy of learning to live with COVID-19 places priority on medical stability. Having said that, what impact do breakthrough infections look to have on our medical system?
Well, we are seeing waning levels of immunity, especially 6 months after vaccination in people who are elderly and people who have immunocompromise. So it's going to be very important. I think a priority should be placed on administering boosters on for these two populations. So people who are 65 years and older, and also people who have any degree of immunocompromise, but especially if the degree is moderate to severe. So that is going to be an urgent matter that we need to deal with, in addition to, of course, vaccinating all of the unvaccinated people. In Korea, I mean, still there are millions of people who do not have full immunity against COVID-19. And so in order to prevent strain and potential collapse on our healthcare system, vaccinating and administering boosters to as many people as we can, as safely and quickly as we can, is still very, very important.
Right, and staying with the booster campaign, Professor Jong, you've been calling for a push that is in the pace with regard to Korea's booster campaign. claiming that the waning protection of those who received their vaccine earlier this year is quite a problem for the country. Could you tell us a bit more about your views on this?
Right. The data of doing a booster shot or not is mainly from United States and some from AstraZeneca in UK. Those studies are seeing the antibody level, not seeing a prevention power of Delta variants. So even though you have sufficient antibody until the 6 months after second vaccination, you cannot prevent Delta variants on your own. So according to Oxford University study, which have looked at the prevention power of a Delta agent with Pfizer or AstraZeneca vaccine, in 4 months after second vaccine, the prevention rate decreased to 50%. So just all this just 1 out of 2. So if it is true, then we don't have any reason why we should wait until 6 months after second vaccination. So current policy from our government is 6 months after second vaccination, aged 50 and older should be get a booster vaccine. And if one is immune compromised, then in 2 months after second vaccine, they are entitled to get a booster. But most recently, our government released that 5 months instead of 6 months booster plan was released about maybe yesterday or the day before yesterday. I think it's a good direction, but I would like to suggest instead of 5 months, 4 months will be more appropriate in preventing Delta variants. The population should be 18 and over, all population in 4 months. Then we'll have more power to prevent the COVID-19, especially through this winter.
Right. At the moment here in Korea, Professor Jong, only those who received the Janssen vaccine that are getting their vaccines earlier than 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Who received the Janssen,
yeah,
they get their booster shots earlier.
Yeah, I should say either Astra vaccine, which is AstraZeneca or Janssen adenovirus vector vaccine, or mRNA vaccine. I think both categories should have earlier booster vaccine in 4 months, not in 6 months, because the data says that you cannot prevent the Delta infection after 4 months. It's just less than 50% is not a big deal.
Right, I see. Which would make me eligible for a booster vaccine under your framework next month then, because I got my second shot in August.
Yeah, I recommend.
Dr. Dan, what are the factors now, the main factors that is, to consider with regard to infections as we chart a new normal? Because officials here, authorities here in the country have claimed we should not place too much priority on the daily tally and more on the number of severe patients and the fatality rate. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, if you're dealing with a fixed ratio, the bigger your denominator is, the bigger your numerator is going to be. And so I don't think it makes sense to completely ignore the number of daily cases. Also, if we look at the breakdown in terms of the ages of the demographic of who's getting infected, that is a very high prediction of who's going to need hospitalization in the future and eventually who may die of COVID-19. So I don't think it makes really any sense to ignore the daily tallies. Of course, hospital occupancy, ICU occupancy rates are also going to be very, very important. But you know, up until this point, the number of daily cases has been a very good way to predict where the infection curves are going, and directly related to who's going to get seriously ill and who's going to die of COVID-19. So it is something I think that we still need to concentrate on.
Right. Professor Chung, when do you suppose now, moving ahead that is, will we witness the results of our shift in strategy on efforts to coexist with COVID-19?
Well, in short term, maybe mid-November, because that is about the time 2 weeks after total lifting of, I would say nearly total lifting of social distancing restrictions. And maybe by the end of this month, we'll see a continuous accumulation of COVID-19 patients. Then we'll see how the government is coping with very severe patients and the death people. So the scorecard should be very good, but I'm afraid we are not seeing a very nice report from the government side.
Right. Dr. Dan, there's been a visible rise, I understand, in the number of para-influenza patients here in the country in recent days, with most of the patients under the age of 6. Now, I understand such an outbreak is normally witnessed in the summer. Could you first then tell us a bit about the para-influenza virus, its symptoms and treatment options?
So the para-influenza virus is actually one of the most common causes of acute respiratory illness, especially in children. It's actually causes 60% of all acute infections in children less than 5 years old in developed countries. I didn't know this, but it's actually a very, very common cause of illness, of infection in children. It can cause both upper and lower respiratory tract infections. So it can cause something called croup, bronchiolitis, and even pneumonia, so severe respiratory illness. Unfortunately, there's no specific antiviral treatment for para-influenza illness yet. Basically, it's supportive care. They can use oxygen mist, nebulizer treatment, corticosteroids to bring down any inflammation due to the virus. And also, there's no vaccine against this virus as well. So the good news, though, is that it doesn't have a very high mortality rate. Most children do recover, but they could be in hospital if they have a severe pneumonia for over a week. And so it is something that we need to keep an eye on. And for parents of small children, just make sure that they're washing their hands very frequently for 20 seconds with soap and water. Make sure that they're not around any friends who are sick. and mask wearing will help with para-influenza virus just as it's helping with COVID-19.
Right, especially as we're planning to reopen the academic arena fully in November, by November 22nd. Do you think the academic arena is ready for that opening?
Well, you know, Korea has had a very strong management of COVID-19 compared to other countries around the world. I think in terms of its impact on the education sector has been less in Korea compared to other countries. I know that the teachers, school administrators will continue to do everything they can. I know parents and teachers will continue to do everything they can. And children actually have a very high compliance rate with wearing of masks, and they will do what you tell them to do. They will wash their hands. They will, you know, try to stay away from anyone who's sick. And I think parents are very compliant with making sure their children are well before they send them to school. So I'm crossing my fingers that November 22nd, you know, we'll have the green light. But on the other hand, I'm looking at the numbers, and they are increasing in terms of deaths as well due to COVID-19, and that's quite concerning to me, yes.
Right. And Professor Jong, going back to the para-influenza here in the country, how do you explain the spread of this so-called, I understand it's called the summer cold. How do you explain its spread well after its season?
Well, I think we have prepared some graphics regarding para-influenza viruses. Look at the graphic over there. That is a human para-influenza virus occurring for past 3 years. So 2019, we saw a peak coming off around May and June. That's why we are saying summer influenza. But for adults, I don't think the para-influenza is a big deal. Because we don't care much about the para-influenza thing because that's very mild. Most people do not come to a clinic because of a para-influenza infection. That's the routine job we are doing in hospital, but also in Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency are reporting weekly about the occurrence of parainfluenza, and also includes 8 different very common viruses in the society. So if you look at the flu curve, that shows the last year we didn't see any occurrence of influenza at all. But 2 years ago, we saw a peak, a first peak coming off during winter time, and the second peak coming off on spring. That spring is influenza B type, and during winter time, those are mostly influenza A type. So the thing is, are we going to have a flu pandemic, endemic this year or not?
The twindemic, exactly.
Yeah, last year we were quite afraid of occurrence of twindemic with the flu and COVID-19. Everybody got a flu shot. But this year we have to be very cautious again, because last year we didn't have any influenza epidemic all over the country, but all over the world. Quite many people has no immunity, no natural immunity against influenza. So if influenza circulates in the society, many, particularly young adults, will be infected because they didn't even expose last year. So it is probable, but the course of influenza coming to our body and our society is twofold. One is already circulating virus in our society. The other one is importing from abroad. So still, we don't have a frequent communication among international countries. So I don't think there will be a very severe influenza epidemic this year.
Hopefully you're right.
Yeah.
Dr. Tan, let's wrap up today then with what you believe individuals can do to better protect themselves from breakthrough infections as we head into the colder months of the year.
Right. So if you've not been vaccinated, get vaccinated. If someone you know has not been vaccinated, help them get their shot. If you're eligible for your booster, please sign up and get your booster. I think that's #1. And now that physical distancing, social distancing has been decreased with the easing of restrictions, I think it's just that much more important that we do all of the personal hygiene and infection prevention behaviors, such as mask up, wash up, washing your hands, ventilating your indoor spaces also is going to be very important. And then the next component, of course, is testing. So if for whatever reason you just don't feel well when you wake up in the morning, and it could be very subtle, you feel tired, you feel achy, you might have a mild fever, don't rationalize, just get tested. And if you have any social engagements that day, just cancel. Just cancel. It may be nothing, but it may be COVID. So just cancel those appointments. And I know that your friend will be so grateful for you to have canceled the appointment if it ends up that you actually had COVID, because you've now prevented a breakthrough infection.
Right, because prevention is better than cure.
Absolutely.
Right. All right, Dr. Dan, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Jong, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, the weather is getting colder here in this part of the world, so do seek to stay warm and safe and smart about COVID-19 prevention efforts, as Dr. Dan has mentioned. Thank you for watching. See you on Friday.
In Jeollabuk-do, Korea in May 2023. The world's biggest sports for all festival, Asia Pacific Masters Games 2023, Jeonbuk, Korea. In May 2023, the champion's glory is yours. Enjoy sports, play life. Asia Pacific Masters Games 2023, Jeonbuk, Korea.
ching ching.